Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Middleware Technologies. Today we are going to look at how we can set up AWS Lambda Function using the AWS CLI command line utilities. So here in this article, what we'll be trying to do is we will be preparing a sample Lambda function in Python language, and we will be utilizing the AWS CLI commands in order to create the function and try to execute it with the AWS CLI commands. So let us see how we can achieve that in this video. So first thing is you need to have AWS account access. Basically, you need to have AWS account with a user who has administrative access on that account. So that is a prerequisite that is needed for this demo. Before getting into the details of how we can implement it using the CLI commands, let us try to understand what is AWS Lambda. So AWS Lambda is a very popular service which is a serverless feature that is provided by AWS Cloud, and it can be used to run your code without provisioning any server, without installing any servers with operating systems on that. So that is how we can run our code using a serverless feature, and it can automatically scale up or scale down based on the load that is being served by the AWS Lambda function. So that also we need not take care. The AWS Lambda service will automatically scale up or scale down based on the number of requests that are being served by the function. So that is some of the features that we get with AWS Lambda service. So these are the benefits that we get from AWS Lambda. Highly available compute infrastructure, so there is no need for us to provision our servers or infrastructure in order to run our code. And also it takes care of managing patching the backend server or the operating system on top of which the AWS Lambda function is going to be running. So that is also taken care by the AWS itself. And as I said, we can auto scale and provision the resource based on the number of requests that we are getting for the Lambda function. And we can also leverage the automatic logging feature, that is the Lambda functions that are getting executed, they can automatically log the output to the CloudWatch service. So as I said, we assume you have access to the AWS cloud and you have a user with administrative access already created. So these are the prerequisites that are needed. Now let us go into our procedure of creating a Lambda function and executing it. So as a first step, what we need to do is create and package a Lambda function code. So here, what we are going to do is we are going to create a Python file, that is lambda_function Python file, and we will be using the following code to execute our Lambda function. So this is a very basic function. So first let us try to understand the actual function that we are using it for. So we are trying to use it for calculating the area based on the length and width that has been provided to the function, and it is going to return us the multiple of length and width, that is the area of that object. So in order to trigger this Lambda function, there is very important function that needs to be defined, that is Lambda handler. So this is the entry point to the Lambda function, which will take our input data, that is event, and it is also going to take the context of your object, that is basically the information related to the client. So this is a very important function that we need to define in our Lambda function, so that whenever a Lambda function is getting triggered, this function is going to be executed. So now let us try to understand this function. So when this Lambda handler is getting triggered, it will get the event object that has our data in the JSON format, and from that the we are going to take the length and width and we are going to save it into the following variables. And once that is done, we are calling the calculate area function with that following with the length and width variables that we have captured using the event object, and we are going to calculate the area, and we are going to print that area in the output. And we are using the logger feature of the Python library, wherein we will be using this to write our log output in the following format into the CloudWatch service. So we will see how the Lambda function is going to access and write the logs into the CloudWatch function, CloudWatch service. So once we have the area, we will be converting into a JSON string, and we are going to return that as an output to whoever is calling the service. So this is the very basic function that we need to create. So as I said, we need to have the Lambda handler, that is an entry point to the Lambda function, and we need to have the Lambda event object. An event object in Lambda function is a JSON formatted document that contains data for the function to process. The context object contains information about the function invocation and the execution environment. Basically, we can use the context object in order to get the function name or the log stream that we are going to use in order to execute the function. So let us now go into our next step. So once we have the once we have the function created, we need to create a zip file, that is using the following command. We will need to create the following zip file for this following Python file. So basically it is going to create a zip file with the Python file included in that zip. So once that is done, the next step is going to be creating an execution role. So here we are going to create a very basic role with permissions to write to CloudWatch service. So for that, what we need to do is we need to first create a trust policy service.json file, which basically tells what service is allowed to assume this role. So here we are defining that the Lambda service is allowed to assume this role whenever it is assigned. So once that file is created, the trust policy file, what we need to do is we need to execute this command iam create role by providing the role name and the assume role policy document, which is a file that we have just created. So once we have that file created, the trust policy file, we can create this role name and attach that trust policy document such that only that specific service is allowed to assume this role. So once that is done, we will see that the role has been created. So as you can see in this screenshot, the role has been created and it will assume that trust policy. So once we have the role created and the trust policy assumed, so this is the trust policy that we have created. The next thing that we can do is we can attach the permissions that are provided to that role. So this is the command that we need to execute: AWS IAM attach role policy to the role name and the policy ARN. This is the policy ARN which is going to provide the very basic execution role, that is writing to the CloudWatch service. So this is how your role will be looking once we have attached this permission policy. So this is the AWS Lambda basic execution role that has been attached to the role that we have created. So once we have our execution role created, the next thing is step 3, that is creating a AWS Lambda function. So here, like we will be using the AWS CLI command, that is AWS Lambda create function, and we need to pass the following parameters to create the function. So the first parameter is function name. The second one is the runtime. Like basically this is our Python function. So we want to execute it on a Python runtime, and we are going to define the runtime that we want to use, that is Python 3.13. So these are the specific runtimes that we have, which can only be used in order to define. Once so we have created our zip file in our first step, so we will be passing that zip file path with zip file parameter, and the handler is basically the Lambda function, that is the entry point, the Lambda handle, that is the entry point to our function, and this is our function, basically the Python file name. So let's say, like if you have the Python file name created with this name, and we are calling the handler function, so it will be lambda underscore function dot lambda underscore handler. So if your function name is my function, it will be my function dot lambda underscore handler. So once we have defined our handler, which is the entry point to the Lambda function, we need to provide the role. We need to assign a role to this Lambda function, which will allow it to write to the allow it to access the appropriate functions to write login. So in this case, the CloudWatch service, and just make sure like you are passing the correct ARN value, and just ensure that the account ID has been replaced with the following XSX. So once we have our Lambda function CLI command that executed, so it is going to create our function, that is my function. So this is the screenshot like of the function that has been created in the AWS console. So once our function is ready, the next step, that is step 4, is invoking the Lambda function. So we can invoke a function synchronously, that is with by waiting for the response from the function, or asynchronously without waiting for the response. By default, Lambda function invokes your function synchronously. So basically, like if you are going to execute your Lambda function, it is going to wait for the response. So invocation type is going to be request response. To invoke a function asynchronously, we need to set this invocation type to event, so that the function has been triggered, but it is not waiting for the response from the client has triggered the function, or the event has triggered the function, but it is not waiting for a response back from the function. Lambda passes the client object to function for synchronous invocation only. So now let us look at the synchronous invoke function. So this is the function that we can use to asynchronously invoke the Lambda function. AWS Lambda invoke, the function name, invocation type should be event, for this case asynchronous, and the client binary format raw, it should be this value, raw input base64 output. And this is the payload, that is the event object that we are going to pass in order to trigger our Lambda function, and we want the output to be in the JSON format, and we can write the response to the following file locally also. But in asynchronous, as we are not waiting for the response file will be empty. Now let us look at the synchronous invoke function. AWS Lambda invoke, the function name, the client format, binary format, these are the same. The payload is going to be the data that we want to pass to the function, and output is the JSON, like we want the response back in the JSON format, and we are going to write that into the following file. So as you can see, the asynchronous, like it will wait for the response, so we will get a response with status code 200 if the function has been executed successfully, and it will show the executed version. And once the execution has been completed, like we can check the response file, and you will see the area of the object outputted in that file. So this is how like you can trigger the create a Lambda function and invoke the Lambda function using the AWS CLI commands. And also, like once you create a function, you can go to the AWS console, open the function, and view the template format, and you will be able to see the following CloudFormation template that we can use in order to create our function. But this is not a complete CloudFormation template. So let's say if you have some trigger values that we need to define, that needs to be taken care manually. So this is but this is very high level, like how the CloudFormation template looks like for a AWS Lambda function. So this is what I wanted to share in this video. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thank you all. Thanks for watching this video, and you guys have a great day.